Settle yourself now. The day behind you can fade into quiet. Here, in this space, you need only to listen. Tonight, we will journey across centuries of history, touching lives that were shaped by struggle, by endurance, and by the myths of independence that echo still in our present. These are stories of survival, of human effort against the elements, against uncertainty, and against the turning of time itself. But do not expect hurried drama, nor noisy battle. The past unfolds slowly here. Imagine it as a soft river, carrying you along in its current steady, unbroken, inevitable. We will begin on the American frontier, where ordinary days were filled with hardship beyond what most of us would imagine. From there, we will follow Lewis and Clark, setting out into lands vast and unmapped, meeting both struggle and new understanding. We will drift then into mystery, the lost colony of Roanoke, with its whispers and unanswered questions. Finally, we will step into the contrasting halls of Gilded Age mansions, where extravagance and wealth sat in stark opposition to the toil of others. For scenes, for perspectives, each part of a larger story about survival, independence, and the illusions that surround both. For now, let your breath slow. Let the quiet images of history rise around you, and we will begin. Why you wouldn't last a day on the frontier. Picture yourself on the edge of the wilderness. The year is sometime in the early 1800s. The sun has just risen, but already the day is filled with work. Your home is not a house as you know it, but a small cabin. Its walls made of rough-hewn logs, stacked carefully together. The gaps are filled with clay and mud, meant to keep out the wind, though in truth it never quite does. The floor beneath you is dirt, packed hard by countless footsteps. The roof creaks with each gust of wind. Inside, the air smells of smoke from last night's fire, of dried herbs hung from the rafters, and of damp wood that never quite dries. Your day begins before dawn. Sleep is short. The rooster crows. But even without it, you would rise. Every chore must be done, or nothing else follows. First comes fire. Without fire, there is no warmth, no food, no safety. You move carefully, coaxing sparks from flint, feeding them with dried kindling. The fire catches, a small glow in the darkness, and the room begins to shift from shadow into flicker. Outside, the land stretches wide. It is not friendly land. Summers burn hot, winters bite with bitter cold. Rain comes heavy, turning paths into rivers of mud. Drought cracks the soil until it splits like dry skin. At times, the wind howls across the plains with a force that feels as though it might carry the cabin itself away. Your chores are unending. Water must be carried, often from a well or a stream some distance away. Wood must be chopped and stacked, not just enough for today, but for weeks to come. Food must be grown, tended, harvested, and stored. Imagine bending low over rows of corn, hands working the soil, while insects hum in the heat. In the barn, animals wait. Chickens cluck impatiently. A cow shifts hooves, pressing into straw. Each creature demands care, for they are as much survival as any tool or weapon. To ignore them is to lose not only food, but the fragile balance of life on the frontier. And then there is isolation. The nearest neighbor might be miles away, across rivers and forests, beyond hills that seem endless. A visit is rare, and when it happens, it feels almost ceremonial. Letters travel slowly, if at all. Imagine weeks, even months, without news of the outside world. Your companions are the creak of trees, the call of distant birds, and the constant presence of work. Danger was never absent. A simple injury could mean the end. A fall while chopping wood, an infection from a scratch, a fever with no doctor near. Storms could flatten crops. Fires could consume cabins in minutes. Wild animals lingered at the edges of the forest, rarely seen but often feared. And yet, life continued. Each sunrise brought labor, but also a rhythm. Planting in spring, tending in summer, harvest in autumn. In winter, long nights by the fire, with stories told slowly, voices low, while the wind rattled at the door. The myth of the frontier tells of rugged independence, of freedom and wide skies. But in truth, independence was never truly solitary. Families depended on one another. Communities, scattered though they were, meant survival. Shared tools, shared labor, and shared watchfulness against the hardships that pressed in from every side. Now, imagine yourself in that world. You rise in darkness. You carry water until your shoulders ache. You mend tools, tend crops, and watch the sky for signs of weather that may undo months of labor. The rhythm is relentless, the days demanding. Independence here is not ease, but constant struggle, quiet perseverance. As the sun sets, the light fading over the horizon, you sit once more in the small cabin. The air smells of smoke and stew, of worn leather and wool drying by the fire. Beyond the door, the land stretches vast and silent. You have survived another day. Tomorrow, the same struggle will come again. And with that picture in mind, let us gently turn now to another journey, not of one cabin, but of two men sent across an entire continent. The journey of Lewis and Clark. Now, imagine yourself not in a cabin, but at the edge of a vast unknown world. It is the year 1804. Two men, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, prepare to embark on a journey that will stretch across rivers, mountains, and plains few Americans of their time had ever seen. The Louisiana Purchase had just doubled the size of the young United States, though maps of the new lands were incomplete, often little more than guesses. President Thomas Jefferson wanted knowledge of geography, of plants and animals, of the people who already called these places home. And so, he entrusted the task to Lewis and Clark. Picture the expedition setting out from the edge of the Missouri River. Dozens of men accompany them, soldiers and hunters, interpreters and boatmen. Supplies fill the boats, barrels of food, tools, weapons, scientific instruments, and gifts to present to native nations along the way. The river is both guide and obstacle. The current carries them forward, but also resists, forcing long hours of rowing, poling, or dragging boats against the water's pull. The banks are lined with forests, thick with summer insects. At night, the air is filled with the sound of crickets, frogs, and the steady rush of water. Hardship is constant. Imagine hauling heavy boats upstream, feet slipping in the mud. Picture nights spent on damp ground, mosquitoes swarming, men scratching at bites that never fully heal. Food sometimes grows scarce, leaving meals of dried meat, or whatever game could be caught. Illness spreads through the camp, and yet each day they must press forward, mapping, measuring, recording. The land around them is immense. Herds of bison darken the plains. Elk and deer move silently through forests. Birds fill the skies in numbers that seem almost endless. For Lewis, who kept detailed notes, the journey was as much about discovery as it was about distance. He wrote of plants and animals unknown in the East, carefully describing their forms, their habits, their uses. Encounters with native nations were moments of uncertainty, sometimes tense, sometimes welcoming. Gifts were exchanged, beads, cloth, metal tools, in hopes of building trust. Communication required interpreters, gestures, patience. Some meetings opened doors, offering food and guidance. Others carried a quiet undercurrent of suspicion. Independence here was an illusion. Survival depended on cooperation, on diplomacy as much as endurance. And then there were the mountains. Imagine the sight of the Rocky Mountains for the first time. A wall of stone stretching endlessly into the horizon. To cross them was no simple task. The men climbed through snow, through thin air, their boots worn, their strength nearly gone. Horses stumbled on rocky trails. Supplies dwindled. The dream of reaching the Pacific seemed impossibly far. Yet they pressed on. Rivers became both pathways and puzzles. Was this the fabled Northwest Passage, the hoped-for waterway to the Pacific? Always, the answer was no. And still, they followed each stream, each bend, searching, recording, moving forward. Sacagawea, a young Shoshone woman, traveled with them, carrying her infant son. Her presence softened encounters with other nations, signaling peace. She guided them through landscapes that might otherwise have swallowed them whole. In quiet ways, she anchored the journey, reminding them that survival here was not the achievement of explorers alone, but the shared knowledge of people who had lived on this land for centuries. At last, after more than a year, the expedition reached the Pacific Ocean. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, the sound of waves crashing against shore, unlike anything they had known on rivers and plains. They built Fort Clatsop, a small wooden shelter, and waited out the cold, wet winter. Supplies ran low, spirits were thin, but the ocean was before them, proof that the continent could be crossed. The return was no easier. Another long year of rivers, forests, plains. Men grew weary. Journals filled with notes, maps drawn carefully, plant specimens pressed between pages. When at last they came back east, they returned not as wealthy men, not as conquerors, but as witnesses. Witnesses to the immensity of the land, the complexity of its people, and the limits of independence in such a place. For you, drifting in thought now, their journey might seem far away, almost dreamlike. The rhythm of paddles in water, the endless footsteps over soil and stone, the murmur of voices in campsites that no longer exist. It is a story of endurance, of vision, but also of quiet dependence on one another, on guides, on the land itself. And with that, we move from the known journey of Lewis and Clark into a mystery that has never been fully solved. A colony that disappeared without a trace, leaving only questions. The lost colony of Roanoke. Now, imagine yourself by the edge of the Atlantic coast in the late 16th century. The year is 1587. The waves lap steadily against the shore of what is now North Carolina, a rhythm as old as time. The salty air carries the cries of seabirds overhead. A small group of English settlers steps onto the sand, carrying with them hopes of new beginnings. This was the Roanoke colony, an attempt to plant a permanent English settlement in the New World. It was not the first effort, but it would become the most mysterious. Picture the settlers unloading supplies from their ships, wooden chests filled with clothing, tools, perhaps a few cherished keepsakes from home, seeds for planting, iron nails for building, weapons for defense. They look around at the dense forests pressing close to the shore, the marshes thick with insects, the unfamiliar cries of animals echoing from the trees. They build simple dwellings, wooden houses with thatched roofs, crude defenses to mark the settlement's edge. Each day brings work, clearing land, fishing in uncertain waters, learning what they can from the unfamiliar landscape. Survival is fragile, a constant negotiation with the land itself. But Roanoke was never fully isolated. The settlers encountered native peoples who lived nearby, some who were wary, others who offered food and knowledge. Relations were often uneasy, marked by both exchange and tension. Misunderstandings, small conflicts, and the weight of cultural difference hung over every meeting. The leader of the colony, John White, eventually sailed back to England to gather more supplies. Imagine him looking back as the ship pulled away, leaving behind his daughter, his granddaughter, the first English child born in America, little Virginia Dare. White expected to return quickly, to bring provisions that would steady the colony, but storms and wars delayed him. 3 long years passed before he could return. When at last his ship reached the coast again in 1590, the settlement was quiet. The houses stood empty, weathered by wind and rain. No footprints marked the sand. No voices rose from the trees. The only clue was a word carved into a post, Croatoan. What did it mean? Perhaps the colonists had moved to Croatoan Island, home to a native community with whom they had some ties. Perhaps they had been absorbed into that people, surviving by joining lives and cultures. Or perhaps it was something darker, attack, disease, or dispersal into the wilderness. Archaeologists and historians have puzzled over this disappearance for centuries. Excavations on Roanoke Island have uncovered fragments, pottery, tools, evidence of European presence, but not enough to tell the full story. Nearby sites hint that some colonists may have lived among native groups, leaving behind traces of English goods. Yet no single discovery has confirmed their fate. Imagine standing among those ruins now, the air heavy with the scent of pine, the soil damp underfoot. Nothing remains of their homes but speculation. The silence itself becomes part of the mystery. Were they lost, or simply transformed? Their lives woven into new communities. The story of Roanoke lingers because it is unfinished. In every retelling, it holds the same qualities: hope, struggle, and a sudden, unresolved absence. It reminds us of the fragility of early colonial life, how survival depended not only on courage, but on resources, relationships, and sometimes sheer chance. For the listener tonight, the Roanoke mystery is less about suspense and more about atmosphere. A colony vanished, a word carved in wood, the sea eternally pressing against the shore. The quiet of history holds them, and so too does the quiet of sleep. And from this enigma, we will shift to contrast, from loss and uncertainty to abundance and excess. From vanished cabins on a lonely shore to glittering halls filled with chandeliers and laughter, we move now into the Gilded Age and the lives of those who lived in unimaginable luxury. Life in a Gilded Age mansion. Imagine yourself walking slowly up a long gravel drive in the late 19th century. The evening air is still, and the setting sun throws warm light against the facade of a sprawling mansion. The Gilded Age has arrived, a period when America's wealthiest families displayed their fortunes in stone, marble, and gilded ornament. The house before you is not simply a dwelling, it is a statement. Columns rising tall, windows framed in carved stone, staircases visible even from the outside. Inside, the halls are vast. The air smells faintly of polished wood, beeswax, and candle smoke. Every surface gleams. Step through the heavy doors, and the world changes. The walls are covered in rich wallpapers, deep reds and gold leaf. Chandeliers of crystal hang overhead, scattering soft light across polished floors. The quiet hum of servants can be heard in the distance, moving silently to keep the great machine of luxury in motion. Each room has its own purpose. A music room with a grand piano, where melodies drift across the hall during long evenings. A dining room so vast that even a small gathering feels like a ceremony. Bedrooms draped in silks and velvets, with heavy curtains shutting out the world. Daily life here is carefully orchestrated. Wealth insulates, but it also demands performance. Guests arrive for dinner parties that stretch long into the night. Courses of food arrive one after another. Soups, roasts, fine wines, delicate desserts. The clinking of glass and the murmur of voices fills the air. Outside, carriages wait, horses stamping softly in the dark. The ladies of the house wear gowns imported from Europe, silks that rustle as they move, jewelry that catches the light of countless candles. The men, in tailored suits, discuss business, politics, and the future of railroads and steel. Each gathering is a display of power, a reminder of wealth earned through industries that shaped the age. But behind the walls of this glittering world, the contrast is stark. The Gilded Age was a time of staggering inequality. While the elite dined under chandeliers, millions of workers lived in cramped tenements, their lives marked by long hours in factories, meager pay, and little rest. Children labored in mines or mills, their days as hard as any frontier settlers. The mansion, in all its beauty, exists because of that imbalance. Imagine walking from the polished dining hall down narrow stairs into the servants' quarters. The air is cooler here, less perfumed. Simple wooden furniture, narrow beds, the smell of coal smoke and soap. Servants moved unseen, ensuring that the life above appeared effortless. Upstairs, the rhythm continues. Parties, dances, holidays marked with grandeur. In summer, the wealthy escaped to seaside estates, houses even larger, built only for a season's use. In winter, they returned to cities where electric lights and telephones, new marvels of the age, adorned their homes. The life of the elite was gilded indeed, shining on the outside, but built on fragile foundations. It is easy, even now, to marvel at the beauty of their halls, the artistry of their possessions. But it is also important to remember the world beyond those walls, a world of noise, smoke, and crowded streets, where most lived without comfort. As you let these contrasts settle in your mind, notice how they echo the other stories of this journey, the harsh survival of the frontier, the struggles of explorers, the mystery of Roanoke. At every turn, history reminds us that life has always been a balance of hardship and privilege, of survival and excess, of what is remembered and what is lost. And now, as we leave the gilded mansion behind, imagine its great doors closing slowly, the light of the chandeliers dimming to embers. The night settles, quiet once more. We have wandered together tonight from the rugged edge of the frontier, through the journeys of explorers, into the mysteries of lost colonies, and finally into the opulence of the Gilded Age. Each story holds its own lesson, its own rhythm of survival, ambition, or excess. As you drift now into rest, consider how the world of the past still lingers around us in the houses we walk past, in the landscapes we travel through, in the myths and mysteries we still tell. And perhaps, as sleep comes, you will carry some of that quiet history with you, into dreams that are gentler, slower, and timeless. Sleep well.